In this module, we're going to be talking about what happened in Western Europe during the early Middle Ages, from the period between, say, 600 and 900 CE. And particularly, you're going to be reading a lot about Charlemagne in the images section, or if you read his life, especially a lot, and about the Vikings. But I want to focus more on the political and economic system, feudalism. Specifically, I'm going to argue against John Green and say that feudalism as a political system never existed. The main political force in Western Europe in this period was the Holy Roman Empire, and this was founded by Charlemagne in 800 CE. Charlemagne was a powerful Frankish king who controlled most of modern France and large sections of modern Germany, and even northern Italy. And in 800, he was anointed by the Pope to be the Holy Roman Emperor. And the Pope was basically using him as a way to protect the papacy from influence from the Byzantine Empire, which, ever since Justinian, as you know, was trying to take Italy back. And this is all discussed in Module 11. The Emperor then had the responsibility to both protect Roman Christianity from Byzantine incursions and to protect Italy from invasions from the outside, and also to defeat pagan peoples like the Magyars and the Avars on the eastern frontier of his empire. And he did this with riotous abandon and was very successful. The issue is that Charlemagne lived in a society that practiced partible inheritance. That meant that when a person died, his entire lands and control was split between all of his heirs, all of his children. So Charlemagne had 3 sons who each inherited parts of his empire. And it split apart and was easy pickings for the Vikings. So that explains the major political force in Europe. But at the same time, there were a lot of minor political forces, particularly all landowners had at least some power. And they all had their own independence from the ruler. And it's this independence of the landowners that's the real political force. And we need to understand, quote-unquote, feudalism by understanding how individual landowners worked in the Middle Ages. A lot of these people owned large estates, and they were expected to use their property to defend the state in general. And they did have connections to more powerful men, like kings, like the Holy Roman Emperor, like dukes and counts and all that. But the big thing is that they were all independently powerful. They all had at least their own arms, their own land, their own territory for them to defend and protect most of all. So they were each able to operate as a small, independent political faction. And they would align themselves with whoever seemed the most advantageous for them. They did not have inheritable stringent ties to the men above them. Instead, they were able to act independently against each other and against their social and political superiors. And that's what's important to keep in mind, is that what we know as feudalism is actually a system where independent landowners would arm themselves and protect their property by aligning themselves with the men it made most sense and most advantageous to align with. And over time, we see these people taking more and more power into their own hands. So during the Viking invasions, we see this innovation where these independent landowners start building themselves large fortified homes that we know as castles. And from these castles, they're able to dominate small areas of land and large groups of people and give themselves even more power and act even more independently of their political superiors. And this is the real political system that dominates the Middle Ages. And economically, it looks very similar to the economic feudalism that John Green talks about, where these knights and castles and these lords on their domains were able to extort peasants for protection money, essentially, in the form of regular taxation and serfdom. And they did this because of their military power, and particularly because they were so protected in their castles and so independently active. So when you think of feudalism, don't think of these complicated hierarchical ties. Think rather of nobles and lords acting in their own self-interest by creating alliances with each other. And I'll see you in discussion.